Please subscribe. It helps a lot.
Jules lived at the far end of the Pacific Rim Highway, where the pavement ran out and the ocean pulled every thought toward its horizon. His small rented place leaned against the salt air of Tofino, a wooden box with peeling paint and windows that fogged each morning. He liked it that way. The walls pressed in close while the world outside stretched wide enough to overwhelm anyone else. He carried a secret that made even the enormity of the coast feel like something he could hold in his hands. When Jules sat still, when he let his chest rise and fall until the noise of daily life softened, he could see the road. Not a picture of it, not a memory, but the road itself, alive in the moment. His mind would step outside his body and travel the Pacific Highway all the way back through the island, each bend visible, each cluster of trees shivering in the coastal wind. He could look past Port Alberni, into Cathedral Grove, where the cedar trunk stood tall and motionless, then further to the flat stretch that led into Qualicum Beach. It was not a dream. Every car was real, every cyclist, every puddle from the last rainfall. He never told anyone. The gift belonged to him alone, a compass with no rules, no guidebook. In Montreal, where he had grown up, there had been too much noise to use it without headaches, so he carried it like a burden. Only here, at the end of the line, did it make sense. Out here, surrounded by rain, sea, and long stretches of emptiness, the road inside his mind became an anchor. Most evenings, Jules sat on the wooden steps outside his place and let his vision wander. He would follow headlights toward the coast or linger near a rest stop where teenagers smoked and laughed, or watch as a lone truck pushed through the night fog. Sometimes he slipped deeper until he forgot his own body entirely. Hours might pass before he pulled himself back, trembling, aware again of his breath and the sand beneath his shoes. He never considered it dangerous. The road always open clear, never broken, never uncertain. It gave him the sense of a horizon without end, a freedom larger than his life in this quiet town. Jules did not often connect with people here. He worked a few shifts at a cafe near the docks, his accent catching the ears of tourists who smiled at his French greetings. Locals kept to themselves and he let them. After work, he walked the beach or biked along narrow roads where fog swallowed the treetops. His solitude did not frighten him. He filled it with the highway, a private cinema he could enter at will. On one particular evening, the air carried a thickness that clung to the throat. The tide had moved higher than usual, foam curling against driftwood in pale light. Jules settled on the step of his porch, knees pulled in, eyes closed. He inhaled the smell of wet cedar. He let his awareness drift outward, searching for the line of pavement, and the road unfolded at once. He followed it east, slipping into that silent state where his own body ceased to matter. Cars crawled out of Port Alberni. A pair of children ran across a gravel lot. Street lamps buzzed against the darkness. He felt each scene rise sharp and clear until he reached the grove and then the next turn, and then the sweep of water near Qualicum. His mind steadied. The view stretched endless, unbroken. He breathed with relief, as though the clarity itself promised safety. Returning always felt strange. His own limbs felt thin and fragile. He brushed his hair back, blinked, and reminded himself that he was still here, still 21, still alone on his porch. He wanted to believe the road would always remain open to him. If he closed his eyes, it would be there, faithful, endless, willing to take him wherever he wished without his body ever leaving Tofino. He never asked why he could do it. He never searched for another person like him. Somewhere deep inside, he feared the answer might break the delicate balance he had built. Instead, he lived quietly, carrying his secret. He believed the world would never reach inside his gift, never disrupt the road that tied him to something larger than himself. For now, the Pacific Highway lay clear beneath his mind, stretching farther than his voice, farther than his memories, and he held on to the quiet certainty that it always would. The highway never failed him until that week. Jules had taken his usual place on the steps outside, knees tight against his chest, the sea pulling a rhythm through the air. He allowed his breathing to slow, each inhale smoothing the edges of the day, and he opened his mind to the road. The vision spread outward, his thoughts gliding across the pavement in a calm current, until the streetlights of Port Alberni rose before him. The scene looked ordinary, but when he pressed further, the images faltered. Where the road usually opened without effort, he met a sudden thickness. The space beyond blurred, smudged in his perception, a curtain over the next stretch of asphalt. Jules pulled back, shook his head, then tried again. The line of the road steadied. The parked cars sharpened into focus, but beyond the bend, nothing revealed itself. He forced his mind against the haze until his temples ached. No movement passed through. The interruption lasted only minutes. When Jules blinked into his body again, the night seemed unchanged. A gull screeched over the beach. The air smelled of salt and smoke from a neighbor's fire. He told himself it was fatigue, the strain of a long day. Still, he could not dismiss the unease it left inside him. For the first time since arriving in Tofino, his secret had shifted. The next evening he tested the road again. He chose a quiet hour when the town's lights softened and the tide hushed against the sand. At first everything appeared as it always had. He watched a van climb a hill outside the grove, headlights burning sharp against the trees. He followed the van, letting its shape guide him, but when it neared the curve leading east, the vision ended. The van dissolved into nothing. The curve became a wall of gray, and his mind pressed against it as though the road had been severed. He recoiled in alarm, breath caught in his throat. The van must have continued, the driver oblivious, yet to Jules it vanished like smoke. He opened his eyes wide, convinced the clarity of the porch would ground him. His pulse thudded unevenly. He wrapped his arms tighter around his knees, but the cold wood of the step gave no comfort. The block unsettled him in a way he could not explain. He had believed his ability constant, not a skill that failed with exhaustion or mood. Now doubt circled each thought. What if the gift unraveled entirely? What if the road closed forever, leaving him sealed inside his small town? He had built his solitude on the certainty of that vision. Without it, the world shrank. In the following days, he tried again at odd hours, searching for proof that the interruption had been an accident. Sometimes the road cleared, stretching all the way to Qualicum Beach with its rows of houses and quiet shorelines. Those moments filled him with relief so sharp it nearly hurt. Other times the block returned. It shifted location each time, never resting in one place. Once it stopped near Port Alberni, another time near Ucluele, then later at the edge of town itself. No pattern revealed itself, only a creeping sense that the freedom he had counted on could vanish at any moment. He found himself distracted during his shifts at the cafe. The hiss of the espresso machine startled him more than usual. When customers spoke, their words slid through his attention without sticking. He caught himself staring at the street outside the window, half expecting the view to collapse into fog. At night, he lay in bed and replayed the blockages, tracing the bends of the road inside his head, until sleep finally pulled him under. Each failure of his gift carried weight beyond frustration. It pressed against the fragile balance he lived with, the way he accepted his distance from others, the way he trusted the highway to give him an anchor. Without that anchor, his solitude felt like emptiness rather than choice. The thought lingered with him on his walks along the beach, carried by the crash of waves and the calls of unseen birds. Jules tried not to imagine where the block might move next. He told himself he only needed rest, patience, time to recover. Yet each time he sat down and closed his eyes, the question returned. What if the road kept shrinking until there was nothing left? The block returned again, closer than before. Jules sat on the step of his porch, body folded tight, waiting for the road to open as it once had. He steadied his breathing and let his vision slip outward, pulling him east through the trees. The pavement stretched into Port Alberni, its lamps glowing amber, but when he sought the grove beyond, everything dissolved. The barrier rose thick and final, blotting out the forest, blotting out the stretch of highway he had always trusted. The next night it advanced again. This time it pressed against Ucluele. The town's narrow streets appeared in brief detail, a man locking his shop door, a woman tugging her dog along the sidewalk, then nothing. The rest of the road collapsed into gray, a void where movement should have flowed. Jules gripped the wooden edge of the porch until his knuckles stiffened. The ocean's hiss in the distance seemed louder, though it offered no clarity. Each attempt left him shaken. Where his gift once gave him freedom, now it offered dread. He tried at dawn, when the sky softened in pale light. He tried at midday, when gulls swirled overhead and the smell of seaweed carried through town. No matter the hour, the block crept closer. He could still see short distances, but the far horizon refused him. Each failure left his chest tight with unease. At work, he moved clumsily behind the counter. The espresso steamed, cups clattered, coins dropped from his fingers. His co-workers noticed his distraction, though they said little. Tourists smiled at his accent, but their chatter slid past him without meaning. He found himself glancing toward the cafe window as though the street outside might fold into nothing, leaving him exposed. At night, dreams unsettled him. He saw the highway draw itself straight toward his home, headlights rolling in silence, then stopping where his vision ended. When he woke, sweat chilled his skin, and the dark room pressed close. He pulled the blanket higher, but could not quiet the thought that something moved toward him unseen. The block's approach unsettled more than his ability. It disrupted the careful solitude he had built since arriving in Tofino. The road had been a companion, a silent thread that stretched across the island, giving him presence beyond his own body. Now, with the thread cut, he felt contained inside walls too narrow. The ocean outside no longer calmed him, it only echoed his unrest. One evening, he lingered by the shore, shoes sinking into wet sand. He tried to anchor himself in the sound of the tide, the smell of salt on the air, but his thoughts drifted back to the highway. He wondered where the block stood in that moment. He pictured it sliding closer, pressing through forest and town, advancing with a patience he could not resist. The idea made his breath shallow, his pulse uneven. He turned from the water and hurried back along the empty street, as though the unseen might already be waiting at his door. He tested the road again once he returned home. His body ached with fatigue, but he needed to know. He closed his eyes and felt his awareness travel outward. The vision began steady. He followed a car moving along the stretch near the inlet, lights sharp against the dark. He tried to push past to see where the car would go, but the image vanished mid-journey. The block stood at the edge of Tofino. He could not see beyond the turn leading toward his own neighborhood. He opened his eyes wide, lungs straining as though he had surfaced from water. The porch tilted beneath him, and he pressed both palms flat against the wood. For a long time he stayed there, heart racing, unwilling to close his eyes again. The thought would not leave him, the road was shrinking to meet him. Each night it came closer. Each day he felt it pressing at the edges of his mind. The block no longer felt like distance. It felt like presence, as if something traveled behind it, moving step by step toward him. Jules told himself there must be a limit. It could not move forever. Yet as the days passed and the vision shortened further, he stopped believing. The road that once stretched infinite now felt like a fuse burning down, each moment stealing more of his horizon. The night felt heavier than the others. Jules sat inside, lights switched off, curtains drawn. He had not dared to reach for the road during the day. The thought of seeing the block pressed against his neighborhood left him restless, shifting from chair to chair, pacing between the kitchen and the narrow hall. When the quiet thickened too much, he opened the door and stepped outside. Fog covered the street in slow curls. The lamps along the road glowed dim, their halos blurred. Jules pressed his arms across his chest and listened. The ocean rumbled faintly through the mist, yet closer than the tide there lingered something else, an expectancy in the silence. He lowered himself to the porch step and closed his eyes. His breath steadied and the road appeared. Tofino spread before him, yet the vision ended almost at once. The block stood against his house, pressing into him so forcefully that the rest of the island vanished. His chest clenched. He pulled away with a shiver, eyes snapping open. The fog had thickened, his own yard swallowed. A shape stood by the edge of the street. Jules froze. The figure carried his outline, his hair, his stance. The mist shifted and revealed the face, and it was his own. Blonde hair framed the same features, the same mouth, the same cautious eyes. The man looked back at him without alarm. "I am Jules," the figure said, voice low but clear through the fog. The name struck like a pulse. Jules rose slowly from the step, hands trembling at his sides. His throat worked before words emerged. "You look like me." The other nodded. "No." It's you who looks like me." They stood in silence. The night breathed around them, damp and unbroken. Jules wanted to retreat inside, yet his body remained planted on the porch. His thoughts scattered, unable to find reason in what he saw. The man spoke again. "I used to be able to see the road from Qualicum to this very place. It used to open for me. Now it keeps closing. Something blocks it. I think it's you." Jules swallowed, the sound harsh in his ears. "No, it's you who blocks my view." The other stepped closer, careful, slow enough for Jules to track each movement. Their faces aligned fully in the porch light. No difference showed itself. The same thin frame, the same restless air, the same posture shaped by caution. Jules felt a resistance rise inside him, an urge to look away, yet he forced himself to meet the gaze. "You feel it too, then?" the other said, the way it kept shrinking. "Yes." Jules' voice cracked, though he steadied it quickly. "I thought I was alone." The man tilted his head. "So did I." They did not speak for a long time. Jules shifted his weight from foot to foot, but the mirror before him did not waver. The presence carried weight he could not dismiss, a reality as strong as the wooden step beneath him. "Why are you here?" Jules finally asked. The other's answer came without pause. "I reached for the road tonight. It stopped outside this house, then I found myself standing here." Jules's breath caught. He looked past the figure into the fog, but no one else appeared, no sign of intrusion or trick. The two of them filled the night alone. The air pressed damp on Jules's skin. He drew in a long inhale, then exhaled, trying to still the uneven beat inside his chest. His eyes returned to the other face, a face he had known since childhood, but never like this. "We should talk," the other Jules said. Jules nodded slowly. "Yes." The two of them moved from the street toward the porch. Jules felt his muscles tense with each step, but he did not pull away. The man sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. The closeness made Jules's skin prickle with unease, yet he did not shift aside. The silence stretched before either spoke again. The fog thickened around the lamps, and the tide continued its low rhythm behind the houses. Jules found his voice. "If you are me, then what am I?" The other shook his head. "We are not the same person. We are alike, but not one." Jules turned to study the features at close distance. Every detail mirrored his own, down to the faint crease above the eyebrow, the curve of the lips. The resemblance unsettled him so deeply that he had to look away. Yet he knew he would look back again. They spoke into the night, voices low, words sparse at first. They spoke of the road, the way the visions formed, the fear when the block advanced, the confusion of finding it pressed against their own homes. Each admission felt both alien and familiar, like hearing his own thoughts returned in a stranger's tone. Jules listened and responded until he forgot the hour. The other Jules stayed close, neither retreating nor fading. The night held them as if it expected no end. The other Jules never left. Morning arrived pale and cool, and when Jules woke on the couch, the man was still seated near the window, watching the fog drift over the street. The sight unsettled him and comforted him at the same time. He expected the figure to dissolve with daylight, but no change came. The man turned his head and smiled faintly, as if presence itself needed no explanation. Jules made coffee, his hands clumsy with the kettle. He watched the other drink from his own chipped mug, watched the same lips touch the rim, the same eyes close at the first taste. The act felt both intimate and unbearable. He looked away, yet his gaze returned before long. Through the day, they remained together. They walked the beach in silence, gulls circling high above, wet sand tugging at their shoes. Each movement echoed, the swing of arms, the tilt of heads, the rhythm of their pace. Jules struggled with the sight, uneasy at being forced to witness himself from the outside. He wanted to turn from it, yet the pull remained, a quiet force binding him to the mirror beside him. That night they cooked in the narrow kitchen, clattering pans and slicing vegetables without plan. Their motions stumbled often, each reaching for the same knife, the same spoon. Laughter rose from them both, unsteady at first, then stronger, until Jules felt warmth spread in his chest. He had not laughed freely in weeks. The sound of it startled him, though the other's smile steadied his unease. Sleep came lightly. Jules lay in his bed, the other stretched on the couch. The presence filled the small space so fully that Jules could not escape the thought of him, even with walls between them. He stared at the ceiling until the tide's rhythm carried him toward rest, then dreamed of faces turning toward one another in fog. Days unfolded in a quiet rhythm. The man never hinted at leaving. Each morning Jules found him still there, always calm, always steady. Together they moved through the town, drawing a few curious glances but no questions. Jules worked his cafe shift while the other wandered the pier or lingered at the beach. They met again in the evenings, walking the shoreline until the lamps flickered on behind them. Conversation deepened with time. They spoke of childhoods, of memories in Montreal, of long winters filled with study and silence. Their stories matched in every detail, yet each spoke as if the other's life belonged elsewhere, a copy bound to the same outline. They laughed at the absurdity, though beneath the laughter Jules felt a tremor as if their sameness carried weight beyond humor. The hardest moments came when Jules caught himself staring too long. He noticed the shape of the other's hair, the way light touched them in the evening sun. He noticed the slope of shoulders, thin yet steady, the curve of lips when speaking, the tone of voice when soft. These were traits he had always disliked in himself, details he had criticized with harsh judgment. Seeing them reflected in another body unsettled him, yet at the same time stirred something gentler. On the fourth evening, they sat on driftwood near the tide, silence pressing close around them. The fog hung low, the world reduced to sand, water, and the two of them. Jules turned his head and caught the other's gaze. For a long moment, neither looked away. Jules felt the weight of his own reflection, every flaw, every feature he had wanted to escape, yet instead of shame, he felt a slow recognition. The other Jules spoke first. "You avoid your own face." Jules hesitated, words caught at the edge of his throat. He forced them out. "I never liked it." The other leaned closer, eyes steady. "I always wanted to look away from mine, until now." The words settled heavy between them. Jules' chest tightened. He could not hold the gaze any longer and turned toward the water. His pulse beat uneven, his breath uneven, but the thought of leaving the moment never crossed him. That night, when they returned to the small house, Jules felt something shift. They sat side by side on the couch, silence wrapping them in a fragile hold. Jules's hand brushed the other's and neither moved away. The contact spread warmth through him, trembling yet undeniable. He let the moment linger, afraid to break it, afraid to name it, yet unwilling to retreat. For the first time, Jules looked into the eyes across from him and did not wish to turn away. He saw his own face, his own body, and felt no rejection. What he had always avoided now drew him closer. The realization filled him with a quiet wonder, stronger than fear. The other Jules smiled, a small curve of lips that carried no mockery. Jules returned it without hesitation. The night stretched long, and the two of them remained side by side, neither speaking, neither moving apart. Jules felt something settle inside him, a recognition he had resisted for years. He no longer doubted the presence beside him. He no longer doubted the face that mirrored his own. Morning light filled the small house in thin stripes through the blinds. Jules woke and listened to the sound of another breath moving steadily across the room. The other Jules slept on the couch, one arm curled across his chest. The sight eased Jules more than silence ever had. He rose carefully, made coffee, and stood at the window while the kettle steamed. The fog clung to the street, soft and pale. The air felt steadier now, as if the block had lifted with the night. He closed his eyes briefly and reached for the road. His vision stretched outward without resistance, each bend of pavement returning to him as it once had. Port Alberni glowed with morning traffic, Cathedral Grove shimmered with dew, and Qualicum lay bright under the first rays of sun. The road was whole again. Jules lingered in the clarity, then pulled back with calm he had not felt in weeks. When he opened his eyes, the other stirred on the couch, stretching with slow care. Their gazes met across the narrow space and Jules smiled without hesitation. The man returned the smile, and something in the air between them grew warm. Neither asked why the road had cleared. Neither questioned the return of distance and vision. It no longer seemed important. The presence beside him carried more weight than any mystery. They spent the day together without urgency. They walked the beach where the tide pressed in heavy swells, gulls wheeling overhead. Jules found himself studying the way the other moved, the rhythm of his steps, the shape of his mouth when he spoke. Each detail no longer unsettled him. Each detail drew him closer. He felt the tightness inside him ease, a tension he had carried since boyhood. Later, back inside, they cooked again in the narrow kitchen, moving with more ease than before. Their hands brushed as they reached for cups, and neither pulled back. Laughter rose without strain, filling the space in a way Jules had never managed on his own. The air smelled of salt and garlic, and he felt no urge to escape into visions of the road. Evening came, and they sat side by side on the couch. Jules turned toward the other, their shoulders touching lightly. He studied the face he had once resisted, the face that mirrored his own, and felt no rejection. He spoke quietly, the words steady this time. "I can look at you. I never thought I could." The other's eyes softened. "I can look at you too." The words carried no grand promise, yet they filled the room with a weight that reached deep inside Jules. He leaned closer and the distance between them closed. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then firmer, both of them giving in to the moment. Jules felt the warmth of it spread through him, not fleeting, not uncertain, but solid. When they drew back, silence pressed around them again, yet it no longer felt empty. Night moved in. They lay side by side, their bodies close, neither speaking much. Jules listened to the steady breath beside him, and each sound grounded him in the present. He no longer measured himself against absence or lack. He no longer sought escape through the road. What he saw in the other's eyes returned to him as truth. He could be loved, even by the reflection he had once despised. In the following days, the rhythm of their lives grew steady. Jules worked his shifts at the cafe while the other lingered by the shore, always waiting when Jules returned. Evenings belonged to both of them, walks along the sand, meals in the small kitchen, quiet moments on the couch. No one questioned their sameness. No one interfered. It felt natural, as if the world had always intended it. The road remained clear. Jules continued to see as far as Qualicum, but he no longer leaned on the gift for solace. The visions no longer served as an escape. They became background, steady but secondary to the presence inside his own house. On a dawn walk along the beach, the two Jules moved side by side, the tide curling at their feet. The horizon stretched endless, and gulls cut across the rising light. Jules turned his head to look at the other, and for the first time in his life he looked at his own reflection with ease. No shame pressed against him, no urge to turn away. He felt whole in a way solitude had never given him. They walked on, their shadows stretching long across the sand. Jules felt the air steady in his chest, calm and full. For once, he no longer needed the road to show him where he belonged.
Please make sure you are subscribed and be one of the strange.